So I'm Erin. I make internets and stuff. This is a talk I've given like many times, so if you are looking for the minibar experience of like off the cuff and asking for questions and all those kinds of things, you're definitely in the wrong room, and you can leave, that's fine. So I'm gonna ask you not to ask questions just because like I have this kind of, you'll throw me off my game. But I'm gonna try to have question time afterwards, so we can do that. And if you thought I was gonna be met to cure, I'm not. And you're in the wrong room. He's in Minnetonka. We had to trade because he didn't want to be in here. Okay. Here we go. So I'm Erin. I am a PHP developer, and I'm a technical lead. And I am aware that technical lead means something a little bit different everywhere, and I'll address that because I have my definition of it. Your workplace is going to have its definition of it. They might not be exactly the same, but there are absolutely things that connect and overlap. And I am an independent, so I work for myself, which is a weird way to say I work for other people, but I pay myself. So it's kind of, you know, I don't know, it's a weird phrase. But I come from the agency world. I spent 5 years at Clockwork in Northeast Minneapolis, and I left there about 1.5 years ago, and I've been independent, so kind of like a one-woman agency. And I help companies that need this stuff, basically, actually. Like I help companies that know they need technology, but don't necessarily know what technology they need, or aren't in a place quite yet to be hiring developers, but want to know where to go next. So that is me. You are in this room. You have maybe recently become a tech lead, or as I heard somebody say when you guys were walking in, you're the tech lead, deal with it. Which is now the new subtitle for my talk, so thank you to whoever said that. Or you aren't one yet, but you're thinking about it, you think you might want to be, and you're here to like get a sense of what's going on. Or you already kind of do this, you do some kind of tech leadership and you want to get better. There is a fourth option, which is you didn't think any other talk sounded good, but that's weird because there's like 20 talks going on at once. So I hope that if you're here, you're like here, which is kind of a good feeling actually. So like I said, there's a lot of ambiguity around what tech leading means. Let's fix it. So a tech lead can be responsible for a lot of things. They can have to do requirements. They can have to do architecture. So designing the software. They can divide up tasks. They can be in charge of the bug tracker. They can do a lot of communication between the client or the users and the team and the bosses, and just sort of be facilitating that flow of information while the other developers get to stay heads down. And I just want to note that I'm going to use language like clients and hours and budget because I come from agencies. That's my language. But when I say that stuff, if that doesn't apply to you, just like mentally translate it for me. So if I say client, here's stakeholder, or here user. And if I say hours, or budget, and you don't really work exactly that way, just think you can't actually work infinitely long. And that's what I'm talking about. There's some kind of constraint on how long you have to get a problem done, right? So just do me a solid and do whatever you need to do to make this language work in your workplace. So tech leads, lots of different stuff that they do. Some things that they are not, they're not product owners. They don't necessarily care about deciding what features are going to happen. They might, but they don't have that same kind of level of like, this is the only thing I care about in the world. And they're not project managers because they don't necessarily care about, they care about what we're doing and that we're getting to the end. But unlike a project manager, they care a lot more about how we're getting it done. So it's kind of like both of those things together and then a lot of other things. But all in all, the tech lead is the owner of the technological vision for the project. And they're the technical leader of the project team. So I think of it as kind of a, almost, in an agency world especially, it's like a complement to a project manager. Sorry, it's really early, my coffee has not kicked in. It's like a complement to a project manager. So you have the PM or the account person who's figuring out like, what are we going to build and who are we accountable to and all of that stuff. And then there's the head nerd, which is figuring out like the holistic vision of what is it going to take to make this software happen. on a super nerdy level. And like I said, it looks a little bit different everywhere. So every workplace has a different set of expectations, different set of deliverables. You may or may not have to actually write requirements. Maybe someone else writes them, but you have a lot of input on it. I've worked at places like that where they have a business analyst, but then I get to go in and be like, this is not realistic. Like, I don't know what you were thinking. And so you have different levels of access to those things. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, it's about making good software with a team. So the tech lead is responsible for overseeing the creation of the software, overseeing how the team is working, where we're going with it, and the responsibility for the software kind of sits on your shoulders, which is a bummer because you're not necessarily the person writing the software. But we'll talk about some ways to make that less painful and less completely unfair. Because if you get all the negative, you also get all the glory. So it's worth it. We just have to like set ourselves up to succeed to get the glory. So what we're going to do today, 3 easy steps towards tech lead mastery. Facilitate, helping your team do their jobs. Advocate, so always thinking about the big picture and making sure that nothing is getting forgotten. And motivate. Guide your team to get the best possible result. So here we go. First, moving things forward, facilitating. So your job isn't necessarily to do the work. Your job is to make sure your team can do their work. It is a great sin to leave somebody blocked. It's a great sin to leave somebody in a state where they can't get something done. So you want to be looking ahead. If you know that on Friday, your dev is going to need access to someone's third-party FTP, request that from the admin on Tuesday. Don't make the dev wait for you. That's just bad juju. Always be asking yourself what's next. So you're going to remove roadblocks. You're going to get stuff out of the way. And you want to be trying to be proactive about this. Because if someone has gotten to the point where they've had to stop and ask you, they've already done the task switching. And there's real cognitive load and cognitive cost to that. So when someone has to stop what they're doing and ask for something else to work on, they've come out of flow, which is like a terrible feeling, right? Like I think most of us in this room are probably programmers, probably tech people, or people who build. You just want to keep building. So it's nice if someone can effectively put the meal in front of you instead of you having to get up and go to the kitchen and make it. It's kind of the thought. But more than removing roadblocks, we want to perceive the need. So, I normally give this analogy outside of Minnesota. I might offend all of you. Let's find out. So, I'm from Chicago, which means that I approach Minnesota as sort of an anthropologist and like sort of a profane, South Side, heathenist, atheist, but anthropologist, which is to say that me and Minnesota don't necessarily have a ton of character traits in common on the superficial level. But one thing I've noticed is this concept of perceiving the need. And this is a phrase that my in-laws use literally. They literally use the phrase perceive the need, but I think it's a very Minnesotan thing. And here's an example of it. I was at my brother-in-law's house, serves me a pretzel. And his house is gluten-free, so I could actually eat the pretzel, which was super cool. That's a very big treat for me. So I'm eating a pretzel, and I'm thinking, oh, I need some water. So I turn around to ask him for a glass of water. And he's standing there with this glass of water. And I was like, oh, hey, that's funny. I was just going to ask you for that. And he's like, yeah, I know. Pretzels are salty. And I was like, all right, cool, thanks. So, I mean, it's weird, but it's not like so weird that I didn't marry in, so I guess it's fine, it's kind of nice. But you want to be creepy like that, to a degree. Like, I will never say that to a room full of developers again, be creepy. But you want it to some degree be, like prescient, be omniscient. See it coming and help people before they even realize what they need, because your job, and you have the luxury to do this, right? Like you're maybe not doing as much code, and if you are, we'll talk about that later. But you have the luxury to think about this whole project And so if you can get 3 days ahead of it, as opposed to always being in the moment reacting to crisis, the whole project is just going to be like, whoosh, much nicer. So one way to actually accomplish this is to use tickets, hours, and burn downs. And the few PMs in the room are like, woo, yeah! But I'm super serious about this. And here's why. Data. Data makes arguments impersonal. So when you have a feature that has to get done or a project that has a timeline on it, and you're worrying that it's not possible to do, and someone else on the team is saying, no, I think we're cool, or management is saying, yeah, but can you get it done 2 weeks faster? If you don't have any data, you're going to go up to them and it's just going to be like, no. Well, can you? No. Okay, but can't you? No. And you're not getting anywhere. It's bad. But if you can walk up with tickets that have some kind of estimated effort, whether that's actually hours or story points, however you want to do it is fine, I don't care. But the point is to get a sense of how much work is actually in front of us. If you have that, and if you can build it out and say, you're telling me you want this 2 weeks early, but we can both see really clearly here, we've estimated that this is just 6 weeks of work, full stop. Then what are they going to do? Now they can't say, well, can't you? What they have to do is give you some kind of concession, right? So maybe now you're horse trading. You're saying, okay, can we get rid of this feature? Or can you give me 2 more weeks? But you've moved to a much more productive argument. You're no longer having just this battle of wills and unhappiness. You're actually discussing and finding a solution. So this stuff is great. I'm a really, really big proponent of it. As a tech lead and as somebody who is in the job of getting developers unstuck, part of what you have to do is know the answers, or at least know where to find them. So for example, at Clockwork, as an agency, we're making other people's websites a lot, so we had to do a lot of DNS stuff, because we either had to transfer what they already had, or we had to do something kind of tricky with set up a subdomain on the domain that they already run on. So to do a lot of DNS. And DNS is so much more complicated than it has any right to be if you don't know anything about it. It's really, really stupid. Just one of those things that we started doing 30 years ago and now we're kind of stuck with. At least that's how I feel. I don't know. If you like it, I'm sorry, you're cool. But anyway, so I had to do a lot of DNS stuff, and I was going to the admins all the time and being like, okay, here's the situation. Can you give me the exact language that I need to talk to their admin so I don't look stupid and so that we actually have a productive conversation? Here's what I want to accomplish. What do I do? And they would give me that language, and I would go back and trick this admin into thinking I knew what I was talking about, and everybody looked good, and it was great. But that was an opportunity where I knew where to find the answers. I knew that we had people whose job it was to be really helpful and make me look good. But I also took the time, every time I took advantage of it and wanted to learn a little bit more. So I didn't just ask for the answers, I tried to grok it. I tried to sit down with them and be like, okay, can you explain to me why this? And the first few times it totally took longer. Unfortunately, the admins I worked with were absolutely wonderful, magical people, and they did not care at all, because they also recognized that's what I was doing. I was trying to make their lives less terrible by not having to ask them every time. So they were really nice, and they helped me figure it out, and now I can kind of fake a conversation about it. And it makes me that much more useful, honestly. The more answers you know, the more people are going to come ask you for answers, and the more job security you have. So it's good to be able to answer questions, and at the very least, you want to be like a traffic hub where you're going, okay, ask Sam, ask Sarah, Bob knows that, Keith wrote that, and being able to at least direct people to where they can find the answers. It's fine to admit not knowing something, but never ever as an excuse. I don't know should burst joyfully from your lips, followed by, but I will find out. This is a direct quote from someone who definitely is not my mentor. He made that very clear. I used to work with him, and he's super duper awesome, and he's from here, and maybe he's even in this room, which would be hilarious. I don't see him, but it would be funny. Okay, anyway, if you could just picture him saying this, he's exactly the kind of guy who should deliver this line. But anyway, it's okay to not know stuff. You just have to ask. In fact, it's good to admit that you don't know something. It's recommended instead of blundering through it, because you're gonna get found out. So the best thing to do is just say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm gonna figure it out. And sometimes you wanna delegate, and sometimes you want to actually find the answer. And the way to know which one of those it is by looking at who's asking. Is somebody hierarchically above you asking? You go find the answer. Is somebody hierarchically below you asking? Tell them where to find the answer. So your boss doesn't want to be taught how to fish. He knows how to fish. That's why he asked you. He's fishing with you. You go get them the answer. But if it's somebody else who is using you as a personal Google, which is like cool because you're probably faster than Google, let them know where to find the answer. I've gotten this wrong in the past and it's not been pretty. So I give you my advice learned from Lessons in Hierarchy with Aaron O'Neill. Okay, second, moving on. To do things right, you need to advocate. So you need to advocate for whoever's not in the room. If you're talking to developers, you might need to advocate for the users, because we love to cut corners. Love it. We're lazy. And I very much say we on that. So when somebody's telling you, couldn't we just, your job is to say, no, because here's the experience that you're going to be cutting out. Or if they want to add a bunch of features, if they want to say, okay, let's build this and let's build it really good, and if you just give me another 3 days, I can make it really reusable. Sometimes it's your responsibility to be like, no, you can't do that. Because everyone wants to write reusable code, and no one wants to reuse anyone else's code. So if it's not actually going to get reused, you're not saving any time down the road. So just be honest with yourself. You have to have this 10,000-foot view of the project in your head at all times so you can make good decisions in those moments. Because what's going to happen is that people are going to come to you. Smart people you trust to do their jobs are going to come to you and say, hey, I was thinking about the problem and here's how I want to implement it. And if I do it this way, we actually get a big efficiency. Or we're going to not have to do so much time on this. Or we're going to go more towards this thing that we kind of want to learn about anyway. And you're going to have like a split-second decision where you have to say yes or no. And if you understand not only what you're building, but why, you have the ability and the context to say to them, that's a super good idea, or no, and here's why not that. And explaining why not that is so important, because humans in general, but especially developers, we're logical. We want to have answers that make sense to us. We buck authority. And so if you say no and don't give me anything else, my brain is getting mad and figuring out why yes. But if you can say no and say no because here's the context and here's the problem and bring them into your decision making, you're gonna have a much more harmonious relationship. So in order to be this overarching knowledge 10,000-foot view person, you gotta write everything down because you're only human. So yeah, you wanna know everything, but you won't actually know everything. So write down everything. Write down the requirements of the project and the features and the user stories, whatever it is that you use. But write down when they change. And write down why they changed, if you can. Capture every conversation, whether it's in a meeting, send some recap notes, or it's in the hallway, and you two just figure something out quick like that, and now you both know the answer, but the rest of the team doesn't. Or you both know the answer now, but you're gonna forget by like lunch. So send a lot of recap emails, or have a project wiki. I mean, like whatever you wanna do. I'm a really big fan of recap emails because now everybody's got a copy and no one can say that they didn't know to check. And if you use, depending on what kind of software you use, you also have an archive, but write down everything. This is how we avoid Groundhog's Day meeting syndrome too, which is where you like have a meeting and you hash it out and everybody has really strong opinions. And then by the end of it, no one has opinions anymore because you are all drained and you just want to be done and you come to something that you can kind of agree on. and everybody's cool with the decision. And a week later, your manager walks in the room and says, hey, but what if we, and then everybody cries internally, but sometimes externally. And you have the same meeting again. It's the worst. There's no faster morale killer than making the same decision twice. So, especially if you work with one of those managers, which I feel like we all have at some point, you want to have a record that, hey, you agreed to this on Friday, but more than that, with those kind of people who are capricious enough to be like, hey, I know I agreed on this, but I want to do this other thing anyway, write down the why. Make sure that you can make the argument back to them so they don't talk you into changing your mind again. Or if they do, it's for a good reason. So here's how to advocate when you're talking to developers, management, and clients. So if you're talking to developers, that's where we start talking about scope. That's where we keep developers from getting way too excited about all the things that they just learned at the last conference and trying to implement it all, even though for the health of the project, it just doesn't make sense. It also goes the other way, which is them wanting to kind of cut some corners or do something kind of cool, but not necessarily have a good reason for it, a good use case, or something that'll benefit the actual user. So developers always want to do cool stuff is the bottom line, and you need to know when to say no to cool stuff. I'm really selling this, aren't I? But yeah, you need to just tell people they can't have fun, and then you'll be fine. I'm obviously kidding for the record. Don't tweet that I said that. Management. So when you're talking to bosses, managers, owners, stakeholders, whatever they are, they're probably going to be pushing you for more stuff in less time. And that is not math that works. So in those cases, you need to be advocating on behalf of the developers, saying, hey, we can't get this many hours out of people, or you want us to do something that is fundamentally impossible. And this is where we go back to our tickets, hours, and burn downs. Because these are the arguments where you pull out and say, remember, we have 6 weeks of work. So what do you want to do? Do you want to give me an extra week? Do you want to cut this feature? What's it worth to you? And then you can start making real decisions. But you have to be in that room and fight on behalf of your poor developers, because you're the one that has to go back and tell them with your face what you just committed them to. And they're not going to forgive you. They might forgive you. I don't know. And then clients. When you're talking to clients or users or people getting software from you or internal stakeholders, a lot of times what that is advocating for the health of the project. So clients, people who have to sign off on things, don't always sign off on stuff. Or they change their mind a lot. Or they also want more for less. And again, math, that just doesn't work. So that's another place where sometimes you have to say no. We have to say no to people sometimes. Not to be jerks, because we want our clients to be happy. They give us money. They're why we have jobs. But it's really important to be able to help them see how their decisions and actions are affecting the project. So if they're missing meetings or they're late on things, it's kind to make sure that they know what they're doing is affecting what's happening, because otherwise you're going to get to the end of this project, the end of this thing, and not have something to show, and they won't know how you got there. And even though it was their fault, they're going to make you fall on the sword for it. So having these tough conversations with clients as you go through, advocating for the health of the project and the sanity of your poor developers, pays dividends in the end. And like I said, just say no to feature creep, because that is advocating for the project. I actually kind of got a reputation at Clockwork for always saying no to things, which I'm proud of. But there was one time that one of my developers, not my developer, one of the developers on a project that I was on came to me and he was like, okay, so I was thinking, if I take another 4 days, then I can redo all of this and make it completely testable, and it'll have these other dividends going forward. By the way, I'm NDA'd, so all my stories are like someone did a thing, someone else did a thing, sorry. And we can add these features and we'll have this and that, and then it can be reused later, and it's the beginning of this other thing. And then I realized you'd say no, so I didn't ask, and you just walked away. And my heart grew 3 sizes. I was so proud. Sometimes it's okay to be that person. In fact, a lot of times it's okay, because someone's got to have that job. Because even though in the moment it sometimes is really hard to say no, The worst thing ever, and we all know this as developers, is when the project keeps slipping. It never launches. There's always something. You never get to the end, and by the time it's almost done, you are ready to quit. We avoid those moments by good decisions earlier, and a lot of times that good decision is just being like, absolutely not. Third, to get things done, you gotta motivate people. I don't want to scare you, but regardless of where you fall hierarchically, this stuff is a form of management. So even if you don't actually have any like formal telling people what to do power, firing, hiring, any of that stuff, you're managing. But it's the good kind of management. Because the best kind of management is truly just helping people do their best work and find their best capabilities within themselves. And that's what you're doing as this kind of leader. You're helping them get to the best possible solution with their own strengths and weaknesses in account. So you have a little bit of telling people what to do power, sure, but you don't want to waste it because you don't have enough to use it all the time. But this is actually a really good thing because this means that we have to motivate people with what is the actual most effective form of motivation, intrinsic motivation. Lots of psychology studies have shown this, that there's all sorts of things you can do. You can offer more money, you can offer more PTO, you can offer people free lunch, free beer, all sorts of stuff. And they motivate fine, they motivate differently, but the best motivation ever is just getting someone to actually want to do it. So if you can convince people to want to do the thing, they'll do it better than anything else you could do when you're just saying you have to do this because your job depends on it. That's a really, really crap way to get someone to do something. So the first key to motivation is your attitude. You are going to set the tone for the whole project, or the whole team, or the whole whatever you are. And that's a lot of responsibility, but you're pretty much the ceiling. So if you are optimistic, no one on your team is going to be more optimistic than you. So you have to try to be here so everybody else can fall somewhere in here. Which means, on the other hand, if you're crabby, if you're negative about this project, if you're pessimistic, you are setting a very low ceiling on the kind of emotions your team can bring to this. And that's just a crappy workplace. Like, that's just toxic. So as a tech lead, you want to figure out how to be a dam for all of the crazy in a project. Everything nuts is in front of you. Your developers are behind you, and you just want all of the nuts to hit you and just fall on the ground. All of the crazy just washing away. So you want to try to shield the people behind you from the every other things that are happening, because you can't like get into a flow. You can't get into a zone if you're constantly knowing sort of the politics of a project and the almost decisions and things like that. So there's an art to that. You have to figure out how much to share so that people have context, but not overshare to the point that they're just stressed out for something they can't even fix. You'll just have to figure that feeling out for your own team and for your own software. Yeah, sorry, I'm back. This is my favorite form of intrinsic motivation, passive-aggressive whiteboarding. And again, since I'm giving this at home, there are maybe people in this room who I've worked with that are like, oh my God, you did that to me. But here's how it works. Somebody thinks one thing about a feature, and you think another scarier thing. So they're planning something, and they're not really seeing maybe some of the pitfalls of it, some of the black boxes, some of the places it could go bad, and they're not freaking out quite as much as you think they need to freak out. I had a project like this where it was a pretty big project for an agency. It was like 4 developers and a tech lead and then the rest of the team, which is like, that's a lot of people on one project at an agency because normally it's like one and done. And so we had like some pretty big e-commerce-y features to put together. And one of the developers, sort of the section they had, I didn't feel like were expressing quite as much urgency as I felt was appropriate. So I tried to tell them, I was like, hey, I'm kind of worried, honestly, about this, and I'd feel better if you maybe got started on it. And he'd be like, no, it's cool, it's fine, don't worry about it. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't agree with you. And he'd be like, well, I don't agree with you. And now we're done. Like, where do you go from there? You don't go anywhere. So what I did was I said, hey, can you show me how you're gonna write this out? And he was like, yeah, sure. So he went into a room and got a whiteboard. Because people are like, how do you get people to do this? How do you get people to explain your code? I'm like, try getting a developer not to explain their code to you. Are you kidding me? So we go in the room and he starts whiteboarding. And he's showing me what he's thinking he's gonna write and how it's gonna fit together and how clever it all is. And it was clever. And I said, well, what about, and he goes, yep, nope, right here, we've got that. I'm like, okay, cool. What about, and he goes, yep, got it. And then I go, well, what about, and I could just see, like, simultaneously the realization and the dread, like, wash over his face, because he had truly realized what I had seen but wasn't able to make him see before. And that was because I made him walk through it in his own very logical brain and get to the point where he had the conclusion that I had already made. So this is such a good way to trick people into agreeing with you. Because developers are logical. This is something that's really good to do with logical people, because they're totally A, then B, then C, then D, then E, you know? And so if you can get someone to try to explain that until the point that there's no F after that, they're gonna see it. And now you're on the same page. And now you're back to arguing with data, arguing with your hours and your burn downs and all that. And you're talking about intrinsic motivation, because this person is intrinsically actually scared. And they actually want to fix this problem before it bites them. The paradox of being a tech lead is that you're not writing the code, but it's your responsibility. So you have all of the weight of the world on your shoulders and very little that you can necessarily do about that, because it's not your code. But when there's a bug in production, you're answering for it. So there are things that we can do to help. Yeah, let's talk about that one. So first, minimize risk. Whatever parts of the project scare you the most, that's what you need to work on first. You don't want to go, I know how to write this auth system, done it before, I know how to use Guzzle, PHP examples. I know how to use Guzzle, I know how to use all these libraries, I'm good. I don't know how to do that JavaScript library yet, but it's supposed to just work. So I'm going to do this stuff first. No. Delay your gratification. You want to work on this stuff because you know how to do it, you know you're going to kill it. Because last time it was the thing you didn't know, and now it's the thing you know, and you want to feel real good about it. But you need to go after that thing that doesn't sound good. That library that your developer convinced you should use because it's the new hotness. That third-party integration with a client that they're telling you the API is done, but you don't have proof yet. Stuff like that. You want to go after those things first. And you want to take all of your black boxes and make them transparent. Because you think that those are your known unknowns, but they're actually your unknown unknowns. They're a known unknown that hides a lot of other stuff inside of it, and you can't know until you go after it. So minimizing risk is the way to cut down on you being on the hook for what someone else missed. The other thing that you can do, nope, not that, okay. The other thing that you can do is go for that last 10%. Because I know when I'm coding, I'm really good about the first 90, and the last 10% is maybe one day, and that last 10% is usually the last 50%, but it's the stuff that's not as fun, which for me is like interfaces and like cleaning that up. I'm just like, oh, no, thank you. And error messages and edge cases, you know, that kind of stuff. We work on the algorithm, and we get that, and we get the dopamine rush from it, and we don't remember that there's more code. So to make sure that last 10% is done, one really good tool, demos. Someone says, hey, I finished, and you go, cool, show me. And then they go show you, and it becomes immediately obvious that they didn't finish the interface, or that there's only one path that's fully coded, and they kind of didn't think about, what about when someone goes over here? And it usually becomes obvious really fast. You don't even have to say anything. They like go to show you, and then it doesn't work, and it's kind of embarrassing for them, and then they're just like, oh yeah, okay, never mind, I gotta fix this though. And they just put it on their to-do list, and they keep moving. So getting people to show you what they're saying that they wrote is a really, really great way to make sure that it actually works before it gets to QA, before it becomes a much more expensive thing to fix. I just want to end by acknowledging this. because it can be really hard to code once you're a tech lead. There's this concept of the maker schedule and the manager schedule, and it's a really famous essay who the author has escaped me. I should put it on the slide because that's kind of a jerk thing to do. Someone tweet it, you guys will find it. But anyway, the maker schedule and the manager schedule. Makers need chunks of time because we have to get into a project. We have to build up these artificial fake worlds in our heads that all fit together. And if anybody interrupts you, the whole thing crashes. You just lose it. And so when we schedule our days, we're well advised to schedule in chunks of at least 2 hours, but preferably more. Whereas managers work on a half an hour schedule. They're interruptible. They're rarely working on something that requires so much ground to build up that they can't get back into it. Just by the natures of their job. It's just a different job. So now that your job is to be interruptible, your job is to answer everybody's questions, to perceive other people's needs, to remove roadblocks, you have to let go of some of the coding. And if you work somewhere where the people you work for don't agree with this or aren't doing this right now, I am going to empower you to go push back against that because it is not realistic. You cannot have the same code load that you had before and also do this job well. Your job is now to help other people do their jobs. And if me saying this broke your heart a little, well, if it broke your heart a little, I feel you. If it broke your heart a lot, maybe this isn't the right role for you, and that's cool. Stay an independent contributor. We need senior engineers. We need people who are just gonna go in that room for 8 hours and like slam out code, and it's gonna be crazy difficult in ways that I don't even have time or frankly the capability in sometimes to figure out. You can be that person. But if you wanna do some kind of lead management stuff, you have to let some of that deeper code work go. And that's okay, because you're not measuring your productivity in lines of code anymore. You're not measuring it in tickets closed by your name on it. You're measuring it in how much software did this team create as a whole. It's like parenting. You don't know what you can take credit for, but you know when everything messes up, it's your fault. It's kind of that idea. You are gonna send your babies out into the world, and they're hopefully gonna make beautiful software, and you're gonna tell yourself it was because of you. And that is what we get out of this. So one more time. Oh, not yet. Facilitate, help people get their jobs done. Advocate, stand up for whoever's not in the room and whatever's being forgotten. Motivate, help people do their best work. And also go kick butt. Thank you guys very much. Thank you. So if you guys want to take off and get a rush on the coffee line, I totally get it. We have 5 more minutes to do Q&A though, if anybody has questions. What's up? Thank you. Paul Graham, that's it. Yeah, Paul Graham is the maker, manager, schedule person. It's an old essay and it's absolutely true. Yeah?
What are your thoughts around helping someone who does good work be a little more efficient and productive? And especially when it's an area where maybe you're the tech lead, but it's an area that's not one of your strong points. So I'm kind of more back-end oriented, especially with more front-end work. And does great work, wonderful work, turns out great. Just want to learn how to be a little more efficient.
Okay. So the question is, oh, sorry.
That's
Cool. So the question is, how do you help somebody who is doing, the work is good, it works, they just want them to work better or more efficiently, particularly when that's not your area of expertise. So in this example, he's a back-end developer and he wants to help front-end developers, which is something I relate to very much because I'm not a front-end developer, I'm very much on the server. My first thought about that is that you can't help somebody master a skill that you haven't mastered. So if they're already doing good work, but what you want is more efficiency or more, maybe sort of like more maintainable code or more long-lived code or more adventurous code, or, you know, whatever it is, you don't have the knowledge to pass to them, right? So I think in that case, what you need to look to is other people giving them the knowledge, whether it's conferences or for something like Front-End Masters or lynda.com, or there actually are good online training courses. You have to look for them, but they totally exist. Front-End Masters is a pretty good one, and it's local. Or mentoring. So if there is somebody in the company who can kind of be moved over to give that person good, like concrete, meaty, real advice about that domain, that's awesome. But my first thought, and this is, I'm like very much spitballing because it's not something that I've thought about the answer to, but my very first thought is you can't teach someone something you don't know, so you just have to accept that, like, bring in someone else. And of course make sure that that person understands why you're doing it, right? So like if they don't know that what you want them to do is build faster code and you're just sending them to conferences, they're not necessarily going to be trying to acquire the skills that do that. They might be trying to get a new set of skills that they'll actually be slower at because it's cool. So you want to set good expectations with them and then also get them the resources they need to get it. Yeah? I have no idea who's talking. Sorry. Oh, hi. Say that one more time.
Faster processing or faster to write?
I believe he means just accomplishing it faster, like getting the features written faster. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yep. What's up?
So you talked about advocating with developers by being more explicit in your motivations.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with developers that maybe have a tendency for being more defensive, and so every word you say puts them in more of a defensive state?
Sure.
Of course, if you give less information, the effect you talked about still hits.
So the question is, I talked about giving context to help developers make decisions and reduce defensiveness, and what do you do when you have the kind of person who's always fighting? And so everything you say becomes a fight, and every bit of context you give them is just fuel. That to me is starting to feel a little bit like managers need to say, bro, you're hard to work with. So if you are the manager, and I am not, I specialize in fake management, not actually management. But I would think that to some degree people just need to be like, here's the candid feedback. You're hard to work with, and I like working with you, and you do good work, but we've gotten a lot of feedback that people just don't like working with you, and I want to help you fix that. So I think that might be part of it, is just like being way more honest than most Minnesotans are down to be. And coming from Chicago, I'm such a big advocate of just say what you mean. So there's that. Also, I think maybe you need to be comfortable. Like, you have to feel it out, right? Like, some people are gonna, because we're nerds and we are logical, giving them context will make them argue more, and not even necessarily because they're defensive, but just because they're like getting really whatever. And if your job is to own the requirements and to own the feature and to own the communication with the client, it is okay to kind of not pull rank, but pull role and say, look, I hear what you're saying, but the bottom line is this is what the client agreed to. This is the time we have allotted to do it, and we have to do it this way. And that is not telling them what to do, but it is giving them context of, we just don't have other options. I need you to do it this way, please. So those would be my 2 bits of advice. I think there's probably a better answer out there, because my sort of default is I don't work with those people, to be very honest with you. So I'm not great at helping them. One more question. Okay, you're closer. Sorry, bro.
How not to overstep and find the balance between giving the feedback and not interrupting or basically trying to get too much involved into a feature and guiding each and everything through it. How to find that balance?
The question is how to find the balance between like getting involved and giving feedback on a feature, but not like getting into the weeds and getting way too micromanagey. That's hard. That definitely requires, some of it is just like a judgment call, like on your own situation, and like knowing your tendencies. Do you tend to really want to know about like how are you writing this? Or do you tend to maybe pull back and let people hang themselves? You know, like you have to know that about yourself and know how to wiggle within that. I think one thing that can be really helpful is using code reviews. So if you are seeing their code at a certain time in the process, and other people are seeing their code, and there's a lot to be said about how to run a good code review, but I think that those can really help with this because there's a sense of openness about the code, but also like they wrote it and it runs, and if it runs, cool. Like, it's hard to tell you to change it at that point, you know? So that's one thing that can help. I think the main thing is to recognize the times that you think you may have done that, when you think you may have gotten too far into the weeds, and you can just say, like, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm gonna trust you to do this, I got too far in the weeds on this, I gotta go work on this other thing, I think it looks good, I'm gonna go. And so actually saying that out loud is both communicating to the developer that you trust them, and reminding you that, like, I did that, I did it, I got too far in the weeds, I need to step away. So that can be a good thing to do to build trust. Okay, that's all we have time for. I'm gonna be around all day, so if you wanna come ask me stuff, come ask me stuff.